The winter of 1873 came early to Wyoming territory, bringing with it a cold so fierce it could freeze a man's blood in his veins. The wind howled across the endless prairie like a wounded animal, carrying sheets of snow that cut through even the thickest wool. Above, the sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the earth like a coffin lid. Eleanor Hartley pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to ward off the bitter cold. Her dress, once a respectable brown calico, now hung in tatters, the hem stiff with mud and ice. Each step through the knee-deep snow sent fresh agony through her frozen feet, wrapped in nothing but scraps of burlap she'd found along the trail. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten anything more substantial than melted snow. 3 days? 4? The gnawing in her belly had become a constant companion, almost as familiar as the ache in her heart. The memories came unbidden, as they always did when exhaustion weakened her defenses. Thomas's face, pale and still on their bed. The fever had taken him in just 2 days, leaving her a widow at 23. She'd barely had time to grieve before his family descended like vultures. "Bad luck follows her," his mother had hissed, her thin lips twisted with disgust. First her parents, now our Thomas. "She's cursed, I tell you." They'd thrown her out that very night, keeping everything, the small farmhouse, the livestock, even her mother's china teacups. All she'd managed to save were the clothes on her back and her wedding ring, which she'd already traded for a few crusts of bread in the last town. Millfield, that had been its name. A cluster of weathered buildings huddled against the prairie wind, populated by hard-faced people with no sympathy for a young widow. She'd knocked on every door, offering to wash clothes, cook meals, anything for a corner to sleep in and a bit of food. "We don't need your kind here," the boarding house matron had said, slamming the door in her face. "Best move along," the sheriff had advised, his hand resting on his pistol. "Folk here don't take kindly to unfortunates." Unfortunates, as if losing everything was a disease that might spread. The general store owner had been the cruelest. He'd looked her up and down like she was livestock at auction, then offered her work, but not the kind any decent woman would accept. When she'd refused, he'd laughed and said she'd be back when she got hungry enough. She'd left Millfield that morning with nothing but a handful of hard biscuits stolen from a horse's feed bag and the tattered remains of her pride. That had been 2 days ago. The biscuits were long gone, and her pride, well, pride didn't keep a body warm. The sun was setting now, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of purple and gold. Beautiful, in its way, though Eleanor had no energy left to appreciate it. She needed shelter, any shelter, before full dark. The temperature would plummet once the sun disappeared, and she knew she wouldn't survive another night in the open. A scraggly cottonwood stood alone on a small rise, its bare branches reaching toward the darkening sky like skeletal fingers. It wasn't much, but the trunk might provide some protection from the wind. Eleanor stumbled toward it, her legs so numb she could barely feel them move. She collapsed against the rough bark, sliding down until she sat in the snow. Her fingers, blue-white with cold, fumbled with her shawl, trying to wrap it around her face. Each breath came out in a cloud of vapor that immediately crystallized in the frigid air. Her breath froze beneath the stars, tiny ice crystals glittering for a moment before falling to join the snow at her feet. This was how it would end. Then, alone, forgotten, frozen to death like some abandoned animal. Perhaps Thomas's mother had been right. Perhaps she was cursed. Eleanor closed her eyes, too tired even for tears. The sound came from nowhere, the soft snort of a horse, the creak of leather. Eleanor's eyes flew open, but her vision had gone hazy. A shape loomed above her, dark against the twilight sky. A man on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy coat that made him look like a bear. He dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots crunching in the snow. Eleanor tried to speak, to beg for help or mercy or just a quick end, but her voice came out as nothing more than a whisper. The man knelt beside her, and she caught a glimpse of his face, weathered and hard. with several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of winter sky. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her. It was still warm from his body, and the sudden heat made her gasp. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "You're half dead already." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, though Eleanor knew that couldn't be true. She'd always been tall for a woman, and sturdy built besides, but in his arms, she felt small and fragile as a bird. He settled her on his horse, then swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her from falling. The coat covered them both, and Eleanor found herself pressed against his chest, surrounded by warmth for the first time in days. "Ranch isn't far," he said, spurring the horse into motion. "You just hold on." Eleanor wanted to protest, to explain that she had no money to pay for his kindness, that people would talk if they knew he'd taken in a strange woman. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was lean back against him and wonder if this was what salvation felt like, or if she'd already died and this was some fever dream before the final darkness. The stars came out one by one above them, cold and distant in the vast Wyoming sky. But Eleanor barely noticed. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than despair. It might have been hope, or it might have been simply the absence of fear. Either way, she closed her eyes and let the stranger carry her through the night, away from the cottonwood tree that had almost become her grave. Eleanor woke to the sound of wood crackling and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The last thing she remembered was the cold, the endless cold, and then warmth, strong arms lifting her, a voice like distant thunder. She lay on a narrow bed covered with thick wool blankets and a bearskin. Above her, rough-hewn logs formed a ceiling, and to her left, a stone fireplace held a cheerful blaze. The room was simple but clean, a few pieces of handmade furniture, a rifle mounted on the wall, and not much else. A man's space, practical and unadorned. "You're awake," the voice made her start. The man from the night before sat in a chair near the fire, a cup of coffee in his hands. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so marked by wind and weather. His eyes were gray, like winter storm clouds, and they watched her with an expression she couldn't read. Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak. "My ranch, about 15 miles north of Millfield." He stood, setting down his cup. "Name's Samuel McKenna. Most folks call me Sam." Eleanor tried to sit up, but the room spun. Sam crossed to the bed in 2 quick strides, pressing her gently back down. "Easy, you've been out for near a day. Fever broke a few hours ago." "A day?" Panic fluttered in her chest. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I should go." "Go where?" His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Back out in that storm, so I can find your frozen corpse come spring?" The bluntness of his words made her flinch. She turned her face away, but not before he saw the tears gathering in her eyes. "I didn't mean—" She swallowed hard. "I'm grateful, Mr. McKenna, truly, but I can't pay you, and people will talk if they know I'm here. Let them talk." He moved back to his chair, giving her space. "You hungry?" The question made her stomach clench with need. When she nodded, he brought her a bowl of stew from a pot near the fire. The first spoonful, beef and potatoes and carrots, nearly made her sob. It was the first hot meal she'd had in weeks. Sam watched her eat with that same unreadable expression. When she'd scraped the bowl clean, he refilled it without asking. "Slow down," he advised. "You eat too fast after starving. You'll make yourself sick." Eleanor forced herself to take smaller bites, between spoonfuls. She studied him from under her lashes. His hands were scarred from work, his movements economical. Everything about him spoke of a man who'd learned to rely on himself. "Why were you out in that cold?" he asked suddenly. No coat, shoes falling apart. "You running from something or someone?" She set down the spoon, appetite suddenly gone. "My husband died. Fever, his family, they blamed me, said I brought bad luck." "That why Millfield turned you out?" "How did you—" Saw you there yesterday morning, outside the general store." His jaw tightened. "Saw Garrison make his offer, too. Would have stepped in, but you handled yourself." Heat flooded her cheeks. Of course he'd witnessed her humiliation. I would never—" "I know." The simple statement, delivered without judgment, broke something inside her. The tears came then, great heaving sobs she'd been holding back for weeks. Sam didn't move to comfort her. He simply sat and waited, letting her cry herself empty. When the storm passed, he handed her a clean handkerchief. "What's your name?" "Eleanor. Eleanor Hartley." "Well, Eleanor Hartley, here's how it's going to be. You'll stay here tonight, tomorrow, if the weather clears. We'll figure out what comes next. But tonight, you rest. Understood?" She nodded. Too exhausted to argue, Sam stood and moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" "Barn. Got animals to tend. But this is your bed." "I've slept in worse places than a barn." "Mrs. Hartley, you need it more than I do." He pulled on his coat, a different one than he'd wrapped around her, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "Bolt the door behind me, this far from town. We don't get many visitors, but best to be safe." After he left, Eleanor struggled to her feet. Her dress had been replaced with a man's shirt that hung to her knees. And Sam had cleaned and bandaged her frostbitten feet. The thoughtfulness of it made her throat tight. She bolted the door as instructed, then explored the small cabin. One room, with a bed, fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a simple kitchen area. Everything was clean and organized, but there were no personal touches. No photographs, no letters, nothing to hint at who Samuel McKenna was beyond a rancher who lived alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Eleanor shivered, remembering how close she'd come to dying out there. Her breath froze beneath the stars. The phrase echoed in her mind, a poetry to it that seemed at odds with the harsh reality. She'd been ready to die, had almost welcomed it, but this man, this stranger, had pulled her back from the edge. Why? What did he gain from it? Eleanor returned to the bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, for the first time in months. She felt safe. It was an illusion. She knew, come morning, she'd have to leave, face the world again. But for tonight, in this simple cabin with its taciturn owner sleeping in the barn, she could pretend she belonged somewhere. She thought of Sam's eyes, gray and distant as the mountains. There was pain there, old and deep. She recognized it because she saw the same thing in the mirror. Whatever had driven him to this isolated life, it had marked him as surely as Thomas's death had marked her. The fire burned lower, but the cabin stayed warm. Eleanor's eyes grew heavy, just before sleep took her. She wondered what kind of man saved a stranger's life and then asked for nothing in return. In her experience, everyone wanted something, but Samuel McKenna had simply fed her, given her his bed, and walked out into the cold night without a backward glance. Perhaps that was answer enough. Perhaps he understood what it meant to need saving, even if you couldn't bring yourself to ask for it. The wind continued its lonely song, but Eleanor no longer heard it. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreams, wrapped in borrowed warmth and the strange peace that comes from having nothing left to lose. Morning came with pale light filtering through frost-covered windows. Eleanor woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the blessed absence of cold. Through the window, she could see an endless expanse of white, broken only by distant mountains that rose like frozen waves against the sky. The cabin door opened, bringing a gust of cold air, and Samuel McKenna. Snow dusted his shoulders and hat, and his cheeks were red from the wind. He carried an armload of firewood, which he stacked neatly by the hearth. "Storm's passed," he said without preamble. "But there's another one coming, probably hit by nightfall." Eleanor sat up, acutely aware of her state of undress beneath the blankets. "My clothes, drying by the stove. They were pretty well ruined, though." He moved to the kitchen area, his back to her. There's some things in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Belong to... They should fit well enough. The pause in his words spoke volumes. Eleanor opened the trunk carefully, finding women's clothes folded with a precision that spoke of reverence. A blue wool dress, undergarments, thick stockings, even a pair of sturdy boots. Everything simple but well made, preserved with lavender that had long since lost its scent. She dressed quickly while Sam kept his back turned, starting coffee and breakfast. The clothes fit reasonably well, though she had to cinch the waist tight. Whoever had worn them had been smaller than Eleanor. "Thank you," she said, smoothing down the skirt. "I'll wash and return them as soon as I can." Sam turned then, and something flickered across his face. Pain? Memory? She couldn't tell. "No need. They weren't doing anyone any good in that trunk." He set a plate of biscuits and bacon on the table, along with coffee strong enough to strip paint. Eleanor ate carefully, aware of his warning from the night before. Through the window, she could see the ranch properly now, a barn and corral, a few outbuildings, all of it spare and functional. A small herd of horses moved in the corral, their breath steaming in the cold air. "I should go," Eleanor said, though the words felt like stones in her mouth. "The storm's passed, and I've imposed enough." "Go where?" Sam's voice held no emotion, just simple curiosity. I'll find somewhere, maybe one of the other towns. In those shoes, with no coat, no money?" He shook his head. "You wouldn't make it 5 miles. That's not your concern." "It is if I have to dig your grave come spring." The bluntness made her flinch again. Sam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Mrs. Hartley, I'm not much for charity, and I can see you've got pride enough for 10 people. But facts are facts. You leave here today. You'll die. Maybe not right away, but soon enough." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. Everything he said was true, but admitting it felt like swallowing glass. "Then what would you have me do?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "Ranch needs work, cooking, cleaning, mending, things I don't have time for with the stock to tend. You could stay on, earn your keep that way, just through the winter. People will talk, a widow living with a bachelor." "Let them—" His voice turned hard. "I stopped caring what people think a long time ago." Eleanor studied his face, trying to read the motivation behind the offer. But Samuel McKenna was like his ranch spare, functional, giving away nothing unnecessary. "All right," she heard herself say. Through the winter, they spent the rest of the morning establishing a routine. Sam showed her around the cabin, explaining where things were kept, how the stove drafted, which floorboards creaked. He was thorough but distant, maintaining a careful space between them at all times. The work was familiar, comforting even. Eleanor swept and scrubbed, organized the meager pantry, set beans to soak for supper. She found his mending pile, shirts with torn seams, socks worn through at the heel, and set to work with needle and thread from the sewing box that had also been in the trunk. Sam spent the day outside, breaking ice on the water troughs, feeding the stock, repairing a section of fence. Eleanor watched him through the window sometimes, noting how he moved with economy and purpose, never wasting emotion. At midday, she called him in for dinner, leftover stew heated up, fresh biscuits, coffee. They ate in silence, the only sounds the wind outside and the pop of the fire. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. There was something honest about the quiet, as if they'd agreed that words were for people who needed to fill empty spaces. As Sam headed back out, Eleanor noticed him favoring his left shoulder. "You're hurt." He paused at the door. "Old injury, axe up in the cold. I could make a poultice. My mother taught me." "It's fine." The words came out sharp, and he seemed to realize it. "Thank you, but it's fine." After he left, Eleanor continued her work. In a cupboard, she found a small stack of books, their spines cracked from reading. Poetry, mostly. Wordsworth, Byron. Surprising choices for a taciturn rancher. On the mantel sat a single photograph in a tarnished frame, turned face down. She didn't touch it, as promised. The second storm rolled in near dusk. The temperature plummeted, and snow began falling in thick curtains. Sam brought the horses into the barn, then came in looking half-frozen himself. Eleanor had supper ready: beans and bacon, cornbread, dried apple pie made from stores she'd found in the pantry. Sam ate like a man who'd forgotten food could taste good, cleaning his plate twice. "You weren't lying about needing help," Eleanor said, clearing the dishes. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" "Can't remember." He stood, reaching for his coat again. "I'll bed down in the barn." "Mr. McKenna." She stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. That she was grateful? That she was terrified of being alone? That the sound of another person breathing was the first comfort she'd had in months? "Sam," he corrected. "Just Sam." "Sam." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Thank you. For all of this." He nodded once, then disappeared into the swirling snow. Eleanor bolted the door and returned to her mending, trying not to think about him sleeping in the cold barn while she enjoyed his warm bed. But she knew better than to argue. Samuel McKenna was a man who'd made his choices, just as she'd made hers. The storm raged outside, but the cabin felt like a small island of calm. Eleanor worked until her eyes grew heavy, then banked the fire and prepared for bed. As she lay down, she realized this was the first day since Thomas died that she hadn't spent every moment thinking of him. The guilt of that should have been crushing. Instead, she felt only a quiet relief, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't known she was carrying. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but Eleanor Hartley slept peacefully in a borrowed bed, wearing borrowed clothes, living a borrowed life that somehow felt more real than anything had in months. The trouble came on a Sunday afternoon. 3 weeks after Eleanor had arrived at the ranch, she and Sam had settled into a quiet rhythm. She kept house and cooked. He tended the stock and maintained the property. They spoke little, but the silence had become comfortable, like a well-worn coat. Eleanor was kneading bread when she heard the horses. Not the familiar sound of Sam returning from the pastures, but multiple riders, their voices carrying on the wind. Through the window, she saw 5 men dismounting near the barn where Sam was working. Even from a distance, she could see they'd been drinking. They moved with the loose-limbed swagger of men who'd spent the morning emptying bottles. Her stomach clenched as she recognized one of them, Garrison, the store owner from Millfield who'd made that shameful proposition. She stepped out onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. Sam had emerged from the barn, hammer still in hand, facing the men with his usual stillness. "McKenna," Garrison called out, his words slightly slurred. "Heard you took in some interesting company." "My business is my own," Sam replied evenly. "Not when you're harboring a woman who brings misfortune wherever she goes." This from another man, younger, with mean eyes and a patchy beard. "The widow Hartley's bad luck, everyone knows it." "Killed her husband sure as if she'd shot him," a third man added. "Now she's here to work her curse on you." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stand straight. She'd heard these words before, but they still cut deep. Sam set down his hammer with deliberate care. "You men are drunk. Best head back to town before you say something you'll regret." Garrison laughed, an ugly sound. "Listen to him, boys. Sam McKenna's gone soft, got himself a woman warming his bed, and now he thinks he's better than us. Watch your tongue." Sam's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. Or what? You'll shoot us?" Garrison swayed on his feet. "We're doing you a favor. McKenna, that woman's poison. Ask the Hartley family, they'll tell you. Everything she touches dies. Her parents died in a fire when she was barely grown." Another man chimed in. "Then her husband catches fever and dies in 2 days. 2 days. That ain't natural." Eleanor felt her legs shaking. The accusations were wild, fueled by alcohol and small-town superstition. But she knew how quickly such talk could turn violent. She'd seen it before. "You need to send her away," Garrison continued, taking a step closer to Sam. "For your own good. Hell, for the good of the whole territory. Woman like that got no business among decent folk." "Decent folk," Sam repeated quietly. "Like you Garrison, man who propositions desperate women outside his store. Garrison's face went red. Now you listen here. No, you listen. Sam moved forward, and though he was outnumbered 5-1, the men took an instinctive step back. Mrs. Hartley works for me. She keeps my house and cooks my meals. Nothing more. Any man who says different is a liar. You calling us liars? The young man with the patchy beard put his hand on his gun. The moment stretched taut as wire. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. She'd seen how quickly these situations could spiral out of control, how mob mentality could turn men into monsters. Sam didn't reach for his own weapon, didn't even glance at it. He simply stood there, solid as the mountains, meeting each man's gaze in turn. I'm saying you're drunk and foolish. I'm saying you came onto my property uninvited and insulted a woman under my protection. I'm saying you should leave before this goes further than anyone wants. Your protection, Garrison sneered. What kind of protection can you offer, McKenna? You couldn't even protect your own. The words cut off as Sam moved, not toward Garrison, but past him, opening the corral gate. His prize stallion, a massive black beast named Thunder, trotted out, ears pinned back, sensing the tension. Garrison? Sam said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. You remember what happened to Ed Watson when he tried to steal this horse? The men shifted uneasily. Everyone knew the story. Watson still walked with a limp. Now Thunder here. He's protective of this ranch, these people. Sam stroked the horse's neck, and Thunder pawed the ground, eyes fixed on the intruders. Smart animal. Knows the difference between a guest and a threat. The message was clear. The men looked at each other, suddenly less certain. They'd come expecting to intimidate a woman and maybe rough up a solitary rancher. They hadn't expected this quiet, implacable resistance. This ain't over, Garrison said finally, but the bluster had gone out of his voice. That woman's bad news. McKenna, you'll see. When your cattle start dying or your barn burns down, don't say we didn't warn you. They mounted their horses, Garrison struggling with his stirrup. As they turned to leave, the young one with the patchy beard called back. We'll be watching. One sign of trouble, and we'll be back. And next time, we won't be talking. They rode off in a cloud of dust and profanity. Sam stood watching until they were out of sight, then led Thunder back to the corral. Only when the gate was latched did Eleanor see his hands shaking slightly. She came down from the porch, her own legs unsteady. Sam, you should have stayed inside. They came because of me. I couldn't just hide. He turned to face her then, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not just anger, but fear. Fear for her. They're idiots and drunks, but they're dangerous. Men like that, they work each other up, convince themselves they're righteous. He picked up his hammer, gripping it tight. I've seen what happens when fear and liquor mix. Eleanor wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but didn't know how. They'd lived in the same space for weeks, but never touched, maintaining a careful distance. I should leave, she said quietly. They're right about one thing. I bring trouble. No. The word came out sharp. Final. You leave now. They'll think they were right to threaten you. Think they can run off anyone they please. But if you stay, we handle whatever comes. He met her eyes. That's what we agreed, wasn't it? Through the winter? Eleanor nodded, throat tight. She'd had so few people stand up for her, defend her. Thomas had loved her, but he'd been gentle, yielding. Sam was something else entirely, a wall between her and the world's cruelty. They went inside together, and Eleanor returned to her bread while Sam cleaned his rifle, checking the action with methodical care. Neither spoke of what had happened, but the air between them had changed. The threat from outside had pushed them closer, made them allies in more than just convenience. That night, as darkness fell and Eleanor prepared to retire, Sam didn't immediately reach for his coat. I'll sleep inside tonight, he said gruffly. By the fire. Those fools might get ideas about coming back. Eleanor nodded, understanding. He wasn't staying for propriety or comfort, but to stand guard, to protect. She lay in bed, listening to him moving about quietly, banking the fire, checking the door bolt, for the first time since the men had arrived. She felt her muscles relax. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside, Eleanor felt safer than she had in months, not just from the cold or hunger, but from the casual cruelty of people who needed someone to blame for their fears. Sam McKenna might be taciturn and damaged, but he was also the first person in a long time to look at her and see something worth protecting. That knowledge warmed her more than any fire, carrying her into sleep while her guardian kept watch through the long, cold night. The accident happened on a crystalline morning in early February. Eleanor had grown more confident around the ranch, helping with small tasks beyond housework. Sam had shown her how to feed the chickens, collect eggs, even led the gentler horses to water. It was during this last task that everything went wrong. She was leading Belle, a mild-mannered mare, across the yard when a patch of black ice hidden beneath fresh snow betrayed her. Her feet went out from under her with shocking suddenness. She fell hard, her right ankle twisting beneath her, head striking the frozen ground with a crack that set stars spinning across her vision. Belle shied away, whinnying in alarm. Eleanor tried to stand, but pain shot up her leg like lightning. Stealing her breath, she fell back, the cold immediately seeping through her clothes. "Sam!" The cry tore from her throat without thought. He appeared as if from nowhere, dropping the hay bale he'd been carrying. In 3 strides, he was beside her, his face tight with concern. "Don't move," he commanded, hands already checking for injuries with surprising gentleness. "Where does it hurt?" "My ankle and my head." His fingers probed carefully through her hair, finding a small knot already forming. When he examined her ankle, even the lightest touch made her gasp. "Likely sprained, not broken," he said, but his frown deepened. "That head knock worries me more. Can you see clear?" Eleanor blinked, trying to focus. "Yes, just dizzy." Without another word, Sam slipped one arm beneath her knees, the other around her shoulders, and lifted her as easily as he'd done that first night. But this time she was fully conscious, aware of his warmth, the steady beat of his heart beneath his coat. He carried her inside and laid her on the bed with infinite care. Eleanor felt strangely bereft when he stepped away, busying himself gathering supplies, snow for the swelling, clean cloths, a bottle of liniment from a high shelf. "I'm sorry," she said as he knelt beside the bed, beginning to unlace her boot. "I should have been more careful." "Ice don't care how careful you are," he replied, easing the boot off. Her ankle was already swelling, angry red against pale skin. "This'll hurt some." He wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency, his touch clinical but gentle. When he was done, he packed snow around it, then moved to examine her head again. "Follow my finger," he instructed, moving it slowly back and forth. Satisfied with her response, he prepared a cold compress for the bump. "You'll need to stay off this foot for a few days. Head injuries can be tricky. I'll need to wake you every few hours tonight. Make sure you're all right." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice brooked no argument. He pulled a chair beside the bed, clearly intending to stay close. "You get hurt on my ranch. You're my responsibility." Eleanor wanted to protest that she wasn't anyone's responsibility. Hadn't been since Thomas died, but the words wouldn't come. Sam adjusted the compress on her head, and his fingers brushed her temple. The touch was accidental, barely there, but it sent an unexpected shiver through her. Their eyes met, and for a moment something electric passed between them. Sam pulled back as if burned, busying himself with unnecessary tasks, adjusting the blankets, checking the fire. Anything to avoid looking at her. "You should rest," he said gruffly, but sleep seemed impossible. Eleanor watched him move about the cabin, noting things she'd tried not to notice before. The breadth of his shoulders, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, how his hands could be so strong yet so gentle. As the day wore on, Sam proved an unexpectedly attentive caretaker. He brought her soup and tea, helped her sit up to eat, even read to her from one of his poetry books when she grew restless. His voice, usually so spare with words, found rhythm in Byron's verses. "You like poetry?" Eleanor observed during a break between poems. Sam's ears reddened slightly. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Ohio. Made sure I learned to appreciate words, even if I don't use many of them." "Why did you come west?" The question hung between them. Sam closed the book slowly, his jaw working. "Needed space," he said finally. "After—" Eleanor waited, not pushing. She'd learned that Sam's silences often said more than words. "There was a fire," he continued, voice flat. "My wife, my daughter, I wasn't home. Couldn't save them." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The women's clothes in the trunk, the photograph turned face down, his solitary life, it all made terrible sense. "Sam, I'm so sorry. Don't—" He stood abruptly. "It was 6 years ago. I came here to forget, or at least to stop remembering every damn minute." He moved toward the door, clearly needing escape, but Eleanor's voice stopped him. "Is that why you saved me? Because you couldn't save them?" Sam turned slowly, his face unreadable. "Maybe, or maybe I just couldn't watch another person freeze to death when I could prevent it." He left then, and Eleanor heard him chopping wood with unusual violence. She lay back, ankle throbbing, heart aching for his loss. She understood now why he kept his distance, why he'd given her his bed but never allowed himself closer. He was a man held together by routine and isolation, afraid that feeling anything might shatter him completely. When he returned as darkness fell, his composure was restored. He checked her ankle, brought fresh snow for the swelling, made sure she ate dinner, as promised. He settled in the chair beside the bed as night came on. "You don't have to stay," Eleanor said softly. "I'm fine. Head injuries are nothing to trifle with." He pulled out his knife and a piece of wood, beginning to whittle. "I'll wake you every couple hours, ask you questions, make sure your thoughts are clear." "What kind of questions?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your name, where you are, maybe some arithmetic if you're unlucky." Eleanor found herself smiling back. "I was never good at arithmetic." "Then we'll stick to the basics." They fell into comfortable quiet, the only sounds the scrape of knife on wood and the settling fire. Eleanor dozed, waking when Sam gently shook her shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eleanor Hartley." "Where are you?" "Sam McKenna's ranch, 15 miles north of Millfield." "Good." His hand lingered on her shoulder for just a moment. Back to sleep. This pattern repeated through the night, each time she woke to find him there, keeping watch, and each time that knowledge eased her back into sleep. Near dawn, as gray light crept through the windows, Eleanor woke to find Sam slumped in the chair, finally asleep. His face in repose looked younger, the harsh lines softened. The piece of wood he'd been carving had taken shape, a small horse, delicate and beautiful. She studied him in the quiet light, this man who had lost everything but still found strength to protect a stranger. Her hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching toward him, but she stopped just short of touching his face. His eyes opened, instantly alert. They stared at each other in the dawn light, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. "How's your head?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. "Clear. The ankle hurts, but my thoughts are fine." He nodded, standing and stretching. "Good. I'll make breakfast." As he moved away, Eleanor caught his hand. He froze, looking down at where their fingers touched. "Thank you," she said, "for taking care of me, for telling me about before." He squeezed her fingers gently, then pulled away. "You should sleep more. Rest helps healing." But Eleanor couldn't sleep. Something had shifted in the night, during those quiet hours of vigilance. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed, leaving them both exposed and uncertain. She thought of his words from that first night. "Stay here, in my bed of warmth." Then, it had been about survival. Now, lying in his bed while he made breakfast, his carved horse on the nightstand. Eleanor wondered if warmth might mean something more than just shelter from the cold. The summons came on a cold March morning, delivered by Sheriff Watson himself. Eleanor was kneading bread when she heard the horses approaching. Through the window, she saw not drunk ranch hands, but the official presence of the law, and her heart sank. Sam emerged from the barn as Watson dismounted, his deputy staying on his horse. The sheriff was a tall man with graying whiskers and tired eyes that had seen too much. "Sam," Watson nodded. "Mrs. Hartley." "Sheriff," Sam replied evenly. "What brings you out here?" Watson shifted uncomfortably. "Official business. I'm afraid. There's been complaints. Judge Morrison's called a town meeting. Both of you are required to attend." "Required?" Sam's voice carried an edge. "It's that or I arrest Mrs. Hartley on charges of vagrancy and other matters." Watson looked genuinely apologetic. "I don't like it any more than you do, but Morrison's got the law on his side. Better to come peaceful-like and have your say." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She'd known this day would come, had been waiting for it even as she'd allowed herself to hope. "When?" Sam asked. "Tomorrow noon, Town Hall." Watson glanced at Eleanor. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think this is foolishness, but Harold Garrison's got Judge Morrison's ear, and there's been talk." "What kind of talk?" Sam's hands had curled into fists. "The kind that gets ugly if it ain't addressed proper. Dead cattle at the Brennan place, a barn fire at the Crosses. Garrison's been suggesting—" Watson trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Suggesting it's my fault," Eleanor finished quietly. Watson nodded reluctantly. "Like I said, foolishness. But folks are scared, and scared people do stupid things. Better to face it in a court than let it fester." After the sheriff left, Eleanor sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Sam stood by the window, rigid as stone. "I should run," she said. "Tonight. They can't try me if I'm not there." "No." Sam turned to face her. "You run now, you'll be running forever, and they'll take it as proof of guilt. But if they decide, they won't." His certainty was like iron. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The next day dawned clear and bitter cold. Eleanor wore her best dress, the blue wool that had belonged to Sam's wife, and tried to quiet the trembling in her stomach. Sam hitched the wagon in grim silence, his rifle prominent on the seat between them. The ride to town seemed both endless and too short. As they drew closer to Millfield, Eleanor could see people heading toward the town hall, their faces curious and hostile by turns. "Whatever happens in there," Sam said quietly, "you hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." The town hall was packed, the air thick with tobacco smoke and anticipation. Judge Morrison, a thin man with spectacles and an officious manner, sat at a table at the front. Harold Garrison stood nearby, his face flushed with righteous triumph. Heads turned as Sam and Eleanor entered. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Sam's hand found the small of Eleanor's back, guiding her to seats near the front. "This hearing is now in session," Morrison intoned. "We're here to address concerns about Mrs. Eleanor Hartley and her presence in our community." Garrison stepped forward eagerly. "Your Honor, this woman is a danger to every God-fearing soul in the territory. Since she arrived, there have been nothing but troubles. Dead cattle, fires, illness. Coincidence?" Sam interrupted, standing. "Unless you're saying Mrs. Hartley can control weather and disease." "Nobody's saying witchcraft," Morrison said hastily. "But Mr. Garrison raises valid concerns about moral issues." "Moral issues?" Sam's voice was dangerously quiet. "Such as," Garrison smirked, "an unmarried woman living with a bachelor. It ain't proper, and it sets a bad example." "She's my employee," Sam stated. "She keeps house and cooks. Nothing improper about honest work." "So you say," Garrison shot back. "But who's to know what goes on out there, miles from decent folk?" The crowd murmured, some nodding agreement. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. "I'll tell you what goes on," a new voice said. "Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, stood up in the back. I rode out there last week to deliver some preserves. Found Mrs. Hartley doing laundry and Mr. McKenna mending fences. Separate as you please. Proper as church." Eleanor turned, surprised. She barely knew Mrs. Patterson. "That don't change the fact that trouble follows her," Garrison insisted. "Her parents, her husband, and mark my words, McKenna will be next if we don't—" The sound of Sam's chair scraping back silenced the room. He stood slowly, and something in his bearing made even Garrison step back. "6 years ago," Sam said, his voice carrying to every corner, "I lost my wife and daughter to a fire. By Garrison's logic, I must be cursed too. Should I be run out of town?" Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the crowd. "That's different," Garrison started. "Is it? Bad things happen. To everyone. The only curse Mrs. Hartley carries is the misfortune of knowing small-minded people who need someone to blame for their troubles." "Now see here," Morrison began. "No, you see here," Sam continued. "Tom Brennan's cattle died because he bought sick stock from a dishonest trader. Everyone knows it. The Cross barn caught fire because young Jimmy Cross was sneaking smokes in the hayloft. His own father admitted it. But Mrs. Hartley has worked for me through the winter. In that time, my stock has thrived, my ranch has prospered, and the only trouble I've had is from drunk fools who think harassment is righteousness." He turned to face the crowd fully. "How many of you turned her away when she needed help? How many closed your doors, offered insults instead of charity? And now you sit in judgment?" The silence was deafening. Eleanor saw shame on some faces, defiance on others. "Furthermore," a clear voice rang out. Doc Hendricks stood, his medical bag in hand. "I've been thinking about Thomas Hartley's death. 2-day fever. His family said. Sounds like the same influenza that killed 3 others that month. Nothing supernatural about it." "Doctor's right," another voice added. "Old Pete from the livery stable. I remember that fever. Took my nephew too. We blaming Mrs. Hartley for that as well?" The tide was turning. Eleanor could feel it. See it in the way people avoided Garrison's eyes. Morrison cleared his throat nervously. "Well, it seems there's no actual evidence of wrongdoing." "Evidence?" Garrison exploded. "She's living in sin with—" "I've asked Mrs. Hartley to be my wife," Sam said quietly. The words dropped into the room like stones in still water. Eleanor's head whipped around to stare at him, her heart stopping. "She hasn't answered yet," Sam continued, his eyes never leaving Morrison's face. "But I've asked. That proper enough for you?" Morrison gabbled weakly. Well, that changes things. Case dismissed." The crowd erupted in talk as people filed out. Garrison stormed away, his face purple with rage. Sam took Eleanor's elbow, guiding her through the chaos and out into the cold air. They climbed into the wagon in silence. It wasn't until they were well out of town that Eleanor found her voice. "You didn't mean it." Sam kept his eyes on the road. "Which part?" "The proposal. You said it to protect me." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Maybe, or maybe I meant every word." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "Sam, I'm not asking for an answer now." He said, "But I'm not taking it back either. Man gets tired of an empty house, empty life. You've brought something back I thought was dead. Maybe that's worth making proper." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Eleanor stole glances at his profile, this man who'd stood before the whole town and claimed her, not with pretty words or grand gestures, but with quiet certainty that cut through prejudice like a blade. The ranch appeared before them, solid and welcoming in the afternoon light. As Sam helped her down from the wagon, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, "for defending me, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "Garrison won't give up easy. Neither will some of the others. This isn't over. I know. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing not just her protector, but something more. But I'm not running, not anymore. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good, now let's get inside before we freeze. And Mrs. Hartley, that question stands, whenever you're ready to answer it. He walked toward the barn, leaving Eleanor standing in the yard, her heart racing with possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. The winter was ending, but something new was just beginning to bloom. The blizzard struck without warning on a late March evening, just when everyone had begun to believe spring was winning its battle against winter. Eleanor first noticed the dropping temperature as she prepared supper, the way ice crystals formed on the inside of the windows despite the roaring fire. Sam burst through the door, snow already coating his shoulders. Storm coming in fast, worse than anything we've seen this winter? Need to get the stock secured now. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She pulled on the heavy coat Sam had bought her in town, his first gift, practical but thoughtful, and followed him into the growing tempest. The wind hit like a physical blow, stealing breath and balance. Snow fell so thick she could barely see Sam's shape ahead of her. They worked frantically, driving horses into the barn, checking water supplies, securing anything that might blow away. The cattle, Sam shouted over the wind. Still have 20 head in the north pasture. Eleanor's heart sank. The north pasture was a mile away, and in this storm, it might as well be on the moon. You can't go out there, she called back. You'll never find them in this. Can't afford to lose them, Sam replied grimly. Ranch is barely hanging on as is. He was already saddling Thunder when Eleanor made her decision. Then I'm coming with you. No. The word was flat, final, too dangerous. Two people have better chances than one, Eleanor argued, already reaching for Belle's saddle. You know I'm right. Sam grabbed her shoulders, his face inches from hers. Eleanor, I can't lose. He stopped, jaw clenching. I won't risk you, and I won't let you go alone. She met his gaze steadily. We survive together or not at all. Isn't that what you taught me? For a moment, they stood frozen, the storm howling around them. Then Sam released her, his expression fierce. Stay close. If we get separated, head back immediately. Promise me. I promise. They rode out into the white fury, Eleanor following Thunder's dark shape through the swirling snow. The cold was beyond anything she'd experienced, cutting through layers of clothing like they were paper. Her face went numb within minutes. The north pasture seemed impossibly far. Several times Eleanor lost sight of Sam entirely, panic clawing at her throat until his shape materialized again from the white. Her hands cramped on the reins, fingers too cold to properly grip. Then, through the storm, she heard them, cattle lowing in distress. Sam pointed toward a cluster of dark shapes huddled against a rock outcropping. The cattle had bunched together for warmth, but were slowly being buried by drifting snow. Working together, they managed to get the herd moving. Sam rode point while Eleanor flanked, using Belle to keep stragglers from wandering into the white oblivion. It was exhausting work. Every moment a battle against wind and cold and animals made stupid by fear. They were halfway back when disaster struck. A particularly vicious gust of wind spooked the led cattle. They veered sharply, and in the chaos, Eleanor saw Sam's horse stumble. He went down hard, disappearing into the snow. Sam! She drove Belle toward where he'd fallen, heart hammering. She found him struggling to stand, Thunder dancing nervously nearby. My leg, he gritted out. Think something's torn. Eleanor dismounted, using her body to shield him from the worst of the wind. His left leg wouldn't bear weight, and she could see the pain etched on his face. Can you ride? He nodded tightly. Together, they managed to get him back on Thunder, though the effort left him gray-faced and gasping. The cattle had scattered, but Eleanor couldn't care about that now. Go, she told him. I'll follow. The cattle, damn the cattle. The profanity burst from her, surprising them both. We're going back, now. She remounted and they struggled toward home, Eleanor riding close enough to steady Sam when he swayed. The return journey became a nightmare of white and wind and the terrible fear that they were riding in circles, lost in the vast nothing of the storm. Then, miracle of miracles, the barn loomed out of the white. Eleanor had never been so glad to see anything in her life. They stumbled inside, horses and humans alike trembling with exhaustion and cold. Sam collapsed the moment he dismounted. Eleanor managed to get the horses into stalls before turning her attention to him. His lips were blue, his whole body shaking violently. "Can you make it to the house?" He tried to stand. Failed. Without thinking, Eleanor positioned herself under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could bear. Together, they staggered through the short distance to the cabin, the wind trying to tear them apart with every step. Inside, Eleanor worked with desperate efficiency. She got Sam into a chair, built up the fire until it roared, then began stripping off his wet clothes with clinical detachment. His protests died when he saw his own fingers, white-tipped with frostbite. She wrapped him in every blanket they owned, then set about making coffee laced heavily with whiskey. Her own hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pot. "Your turn," Sam said through chattering teeth. "You're soaked through." Eleanor looked down, surprised to find he was right. Ice crystals had formed on her dress, and she couldn't feel her feet. Moving mechanically, she peeled off the frozen layers, wrapping herself in Sam's heavy robe. They sat close to the fire, sipping the scalding coffee, slowly returning to life. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing, shaking the cabin walls. "The cattle," Sam said eventually. "Some probably made it back on their own. We'll find the rest when this clears." Eleanor stared into the flames. "They're not worth your life. Ranch fails without them. Ranch fails without you, too." Sam was quiet for a long moment. When Eleanor looked at him, his eyes were on her face, dark and intense. "You could have died out there," he said softly. "So could you. I've faced that before, but watching you ride into that storm..." He shook his head. "Eleanor, I can't do that again. Can't lose..." His voice broke slightly. Eleanor set down her cup and moved closer, close enough to feel his warmth through the blankets. "You didn't lose me. We're both here. We're safe. When I fell, when I thought we might not make it back..." Sam reached out, his hand finding hers. "All I could think was that I'd never told you, never said the words." Eleanor's heart thundered. "Sam, I love you." The words came out rough, uncertain, as if he'd forgotten how to say them. "Didn't mean to, tried not to, but somewhere between you mending my shirts and standing beside me in that town hall, it happened anyway." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. "I love you too. Have for weeks, maybe longer." He pulled her against him then, blankets and all, holding her like she might disappear. Eleanor buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and hay and Sam himself. "Marry me," he whispered against her hair. "Not for propriety or to quiet gossips. Marry me because I can't imagine facing another storm without you beside me." "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "Yes, Sam, always yes." They held each other as the storm raged outside. Two souls who'd found warmth in the midst of winter's fury. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept sitting up, wrapped in shared blankets and the promise of a future neither had dared hope for. Dawn came quietly, the storm blown out sometime in the night. Eleanor woke to find Sam watching her, his face soft with an emotion she was still learning to recognize. Her breath froze beneath the stars, he murmured, echoing the words from that first night. "But not anymore, never again." Eleanor kissed him then, soft and sure, tasting promise and permanence. Outside, the world lay buried in white, but inside their small cabin, spring had already arrived. When they finally ventured out, they found most of the cattle had indeed made it back, huddled against the barn. The ranch had survived, as they had survived, through trust and determination and the simple refusal to face the storm alone. "We make a good team," Sam said, his arm around Eleanor's waist as they surveyed their domain. "The best," Eleanor agreed, leaning into his warmth. The sun broke through the clouds then, setting the snow-covered landscape ablaze with light. It was a new day, a new season, a new life waiting to be built, and they would build it together. Come what may, spring arrived like a miracle, transforming the harsh Wyoming landscape into something altogether different. The snow retreated day by day, revealing green shoots pushing through the dark earth. Wildflowers appeared in the meadows, Indian paintbrush, prairie roses, lupines painting the hills in purple and pink and flame. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the cabin, breathing in the sweet morning air. 3 weeks had passed since the blizzard, since Sam's proposal, since everything changed. Her ankle had healed completely, and Sam's leg, though still tender, no longer kept him from his work. "Ready?" Sam appeared beside her, clean-shaven for the occasion, wearing his best shirt, the one she'd mended with extra care. Today they would ride to town to be married by Reverend Patterson. A simple ceremony. No fuss. Just the way they both wanted it. Almost. Eleanor smoothed down her dress, not the borrowed blue wool anymore, but a new one Sam had insisted on buying. Simple green cotton that brought out the color in her eyes, he'd said, blushing like a schoolboy at his own words. They'd been rebuilding more than just storm damage these past weeks. The barn had needed repairs. Fences required mending. But alongside the physical work, they'd been constructing something else, a life together, careful and deliberate as any carpentry. Sam had moved his things from the barn, finally claiming his place in the house. They'd rearranged furniture, made space for 2 lives to blend into one. Eleanor had even convinced him to turn the photograph on the mantel right side up. The image of his late wife and daughter now watched over them with gentle eyes. Part of the past, but no longer a wound that wouldn't heal. "You sure about this?" Sam asked, as he'd asked every day since she'd said yes. Eleanor turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest. "Samuel McKenna, I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, still somewhat amazed that he was allowed this closeness. The ride to town was different from that last journey, where before they'd traveled in tense silence. Now they talked easily, about plans for the ranch, about adding a vegetable garden, about maybe getting some sheep to diversify their stock. Mrs. Patterson sent word she's making a cake. Eleanor said, and Doc Hendricks insisted on standing as witness. "Good people," Sam acknowledged. "Seems the town's opinion has shifted some." Indeed, the reception in Millfield was markedly different. People nodded respectfully as they passed, some even calling out congratulations. Harold Garrison was nowhere to be seen, his influence diminished by his own bitter persistence in the face of mounting opposition. The ceremony was brief, but beautiful. Reverend Patterson spoke about second chances and the courage to trust again after loss. Mrs. Patterson had indeed made a cake, and a surprising number of townspeople gathered to wish them well. "Never thought I'd see Sam McKenna smile like that," old Pete from the livery stable murmured to Doc Hendricks. "Love'll do that to a man." The doctor replied, "Even one who thought he was done with it." As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Watson approached, hat in hand. "Wanted to apologize again for that business with the hearing, and to let you know Garrison's leaving town. Seems his creditors finally caught up with him. Turns out he owed money to half the territory." Eleanor felt only relief. No satisfaction in another's downfall. Just grateful that particular shadow would no longer darken their door. The ride home was quiet, but it was the quiet of contentment. Eleanor wore Sam's ring, a simple silver band that had been his mother's, and kept glancing at it in wonder. As they approached the ranch, Sam suddenly reined in thunder. "Look!" The pastures were full of new growth, and their surviving cattle grazed peacefully. The cabin sat solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney. But it was the small details that caught Eleanor's eye. The laundry line she'd strung, the rocking chair Sam had built for the porch, the beginnings of her garden plot. Home. she said softly. Our home, Sam corrected, helping her down from Belle. That night, as they sat before the fire, in 2 chairs now, close enough to touch, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that desperate night when her breath froze beneath the stars, to this moment of perfect peace. What are you thinking? Sam asked, reaching over to take her hand. About how strange life is. If Thomas hadn't died, if his family hadn't cast me out, if that storm hadn't driven me to your door, then I'd still be alone in this cabin, growing older and bitter, forgetting what it felt like to hope. Sam brought her hand to his lips. Maybe things happen the way they're supposed to, even the hard things. Eleanor moved to sit in his lap, something she was still getting used to being allowed. Sam's arms came around her automatically, holding her secure. No more sleeping in the barn for you, Mr. McKenna, she teased. No more cold nights for you, Mrs. McKenna, he replied, his voice warm with promise. They sat watching the fire die down, planning their future in quiet voices. Come summer, they'd add to the house, maybe a proper bedroom, eventually a nursery if they were so blessed. Sam would teach Eleanor to ride properly, to rope and brand. She'd teach him to laugh more, to trust in happiness. I never thanked you properly, Eleanor said suddenly, for saving my life that night. You saved mine right back, Sam replied. Just took longer to realize I was dying. As the evening deepened, they made their way to bed, their bed now, warm with shared heat and the comfort of belonging. Outside, a million stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed Eleanor's despair just months ago. But now, safe in Sam's arms, her breath came easy and warm. No more freezing beneath the stars, no more desperate isolation. She'd found her place, her person, her purpose. I love you, Sam whispered in the darkness, still marveling at the words. I love you too, Eleanor replied, sealing the promise with a kiss. Spring had come to Wyoming, melting more than just snow. 2 wounded hearts had thawed, learned to beat again, learned to beat together. The ranch would prosper, the town would fully embrace them, and children's laughter would eventually ring through the cabin. But all that was still to come. For now, there was just this, the quiet breathing of 2 people who'd found their way through winter's worst storm to the warmth waiting on the other side. Sam pulled Eleanor closer, and she nestled against him, finally understanding what he'd meant that first night. Stay here, in my bed of warmth, he'd said. And she had. And she would. For all the seasons to come, the coyotes called in the distance, and the wind whispered through the new grass. But Eleanor no longer heard loneliness in those sounds. Instead, she heard the wild symphony of home, of land that tested you but rewarded courage, of love that came when you least expected it but needed it most. Her breath no longer froze beneath the stars. It mingled warm with Sam's in the darkness. 2 made 1. Winter's casualties transformed into spring's greatest triumph. And in the morning, they would wake together, ready to build their life under the endless Wyoming sky. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Old West. If you enjoyed Eleanor and Sam's story, we'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier love stories. Share your thoughts about the story and tell us which part touched your heart the most. Until next time, partners.